Sometimes we forget just how much our president posts online. In just the last 24 hours, he's posted a picture that says, "President Trump ages in reverse," posted a photo from his trip to China, then another photo from his trip to China, then a third photo of his trip to China, this time with the text, "President Trump gets younger." He posted an AI picture of him looking at a younger version of himself with the caption, "Same guy, even more energy." Then another AI image saying, "We made America great again." Then he railed against so-called climate activism.
Greetings, everyone. David Stone here. Let's dive right into the details. Trump, an individual notorious for publishing late-night tirades concerning Diet Coke around 3 a.m., completely ceased all communications for a duration exceeding 2 hours during one of the most legally perilous days of his presidency. A quiet period like that from his end does not indicate tranquility. Rather, it signals absolute terror. This was no temporary glitch, nor was it a network disruption. This represented a leader surrounded by staff members anxiously whispering about the prospects of the 25th Amendment, while lawmakers evaluated the cloakroom decor, all while being forced to confront absolute ruin. Donald Trump's Department of Justice is currently enduring direct confrontation for concealing additional records tied to Epstein.
Newly released documents that were missing from the Epstein files contain serious, unverified allegations against President Trump. The Justice Department posted 3 FBI memos describing interviews with a woman who accuses both Jeffrey Epstein and President Trump of sexually assaulting her when she was a teenager.
The root cause of this sudden quiet was not a drop in tracking polls or a slight from an international head of state. It was an explicit, televised, practically dramatic admonition delivered straight from the bench. Picture being the ultimate global leader, only to have a magistrate whom you can neither dismiss nor attack on social media look directly past the camera lens into your very core, informing you directly that your upcoming residence could be a windowless cell lacking internet access for the remainder of your natural days. This is no mere partisan smear campaign.
Prosecutors accusing Donald Trump of plotting to overturn the 2020 election had sought what's called a protective order in the case, barring the former president from publicly sharing evidence that could be used to threaten or intimidate government witnesses. But a federal judge on Friday said that the requested order was too broad. However, she warned Trump to tread carefully about making inflammatory public statements.
The case is a ridiculous case. It's a First Amendment case. But we don't want Trump to speak. So,
positioned at the stand is an individual barely managing to maintain composure. Yet you recognize that sensation when a structure sustains one fracture too many? You observe this individual, and the sheer gravity of the circumstances, the intimidation, the hidden information, the dread of exposing the reality completely overwhelms them. They do not merely weep or speak softly. They break down completely. Their shouts are loud enough that they likely damage the finish on the wooden judicial desk. The statement cuts through the complex legal terminology like a jagged fragment. Trump gave the order. Boom. That represents the sound of a political foundation disintegrating entirely. The entire chamber falls completely still, yet the individual on the stand does not merely shout. Their physical form gives out entirely. They pass out. We are observing an absolute physical collapse right inside the witness box. The sort of deep, agonizing emotional breakdown that no amount of public relations maneuvering can successfully reframe. A legal team cannot cross-examine an emotional collapse. An objection cannot be raised against psychological trauma.
Yeah, so Jennifer McCabe is actually a very critical witness in this case, and her testimony was a bit different from her first trial.
Okay.
She was a lot more measured. She was not really going off on tangents. You can tell that she's getting used to being on the stand. But this string of text messages, the whole point is that Karen Reed is being framed.
Right.
Something happened to O'Keefe in that house the night before, and everybody is basically colluding to cover it up and pin it on her. So these text messages show the Alberts and others that they say are involved getting their story straight according to the defense.
Right.
And some other things that kind of came out of her testimony on cross, which I thought was quite strong.
It originated directly from the bench. It serves as the judicial counterpart to a targeted strike on an individual's mental state. And what exactly was the feedback from the public figure who established a reputation on retaliating with double the force? Catatonia. That is the descriptor leaked by personnel hiding beneath their workstations. Catatonic. Neither enraged nor confrontational. Paralyzed. Immobilized. Because for once, no retaliation exists. No spin can save him. There is only the horrifying realization that the legal system has firmly tightened its grip around his neck. And here is the ultimate twist. This development served merely as the final detail on an escalating disaster of structural chaos. The executive mansion functioned as an active explosive charge long before that particular individual ever approached the stand. The hallways reeked of open rebellion. Caroline Leavitt, the press representative, was seen physically giving way under the immense pressure of validating actions that cannot be validated.
You tweeted this. Senator Gillibrand is a fierce advocate for women who deserves the utmost respect. The president hasn't seen the full wrath of America's women yet, but he's about to. 25th, the 25th Amendment. What are you saying here, Congresswoman?
Well, I've been speaking out about the invocation of the 25th Amendment since early this year, because I do think the president...
What exactly triggered the spark that prompted Judge Sullivan to deliver such a severe warning? It is a documentation pathway tracking directly back to the center of the executive branch's attempts to suppress the reality. Based on the material presented within the court, material the legal team holds up as definitive proof, we are examining transactions, distinct and verifiable financial streams routed directly toward Mar-a-Lago. Furthermore, those monetary trails correspond perfectly with a specific array of hidden text mandated by none other than Attorney General Pam Bondi. The Chief Legal Office dictated instructions to obscure specific sentences and conceal specific identities, ensuring the electorate remained unaware of the comprehensive reality. Now, the distressed individual on the stand is informing the chamber that the precise phrases obscured by those dark markers constitute the master plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Bondi, I think you and pretty much everybody else here and throughout the country believes that convicted sex offenders don't deserve special treatment or privileges in prison. And yet, Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator, received perk after perk in prison. In July, she had a 2-day interview with your deputy and President Trump's former defense attorney, Todd Blanche.
It serves as the definitive demonstration that Trump was no mere observer, but rather the mastermind behind a plot to compromise individuals capable of securing his conviction. Let us also remember Kash Patel. He provided testimony under oath. He delivered his narrative. However, according to the legal authorities, he did not merely suffer a lapse in memory. He committed perjury. They are charging him with lying under oath, placing his certified declarations directly against the unyielding information contained within the evidence logs. When a case involves a witness collapsing during testimony while shouting about directives, combined with a former high-ranking figure facing penalties for what the bench categorizes as fabrications, you are no longer dealing with a speculative plot. You are dealing with an active conspiracy prosecution. Judge Sullivan evaluated this entire disaster: the obscured documentation, the questionable transactions, the untruthful statements under oath, and the shattered individual on the floor of his court, and established a direct link straight to the executive office. If it is determined that you directed this coordinated effort of judicial obstruction, Sullivan indicated, you will finish your life in federal confinement. Let us be completely transparent about what this lack of response truly indicates. This is not tactical positioning. It is sheer dread. It demonstrates that the legal counsel has at last forced him to comprehend the reality. It means they have presented him with the literal legislation, 18 U.S. Code, Section 1512. That is the primary statute. That is the witness intimidation and obstruction framework that carries severe penalties. Tampering with an individual, giving testimony, yields a 20-year sentence. directing a comprehensive operation to suppress individuals who can dismantle your defense through documentation results in the remainder of your natural life behind bars. And when a magistrate glares directly at you and informs you that this is the dynamic of the day, even the most self-absorbed mind ultimately comprehends the seriousness of the event. This quiet period is the sound of an individual recognizing that the scenario has shifted completely from a political vendetta to a permanent prison sentence. Let us return briefly to that judicial chamber, because the specific elements are what render this scenario incredibly fascinating. The established press corporations, in their overly cautious approach, were attempting to determine how to report the event while avoiding defamation liabilities. They were qualifying their statements. The magistrate appeared to imply, no, halt right there. The magistrate did not imply a single thing. The magistrate delivered a prospective determination on the outcomes if the material evidence holds up. It functioned as an ultimatum presented as a judicial admonition. It was anchored by financial documents, sworn statements, and the precise form of hard proof that prosecuting authorities covet. This was not conjecture. It served as an advance look at the ultimate sentencing proceeding. The day commenced in a fashion typical for the erratic timeline of this executive term, meaning it was already completely chaotic. The talk surrounding the 25th Amendment carried more weight than the formal media announcements. The private discussions among conservative lawmakers regarding a removal determination had progressed from abstract theory to logistical planning. Then the Epstein case witness approaches the stand. The public must grasp the magnitude of the situation here. This does not involve a review of historical transportation logs. This stands as an active federal inquiry into whether the sitting president of the United States personally orchestrated an illegal plot to quiet individuals possessing data regarding his potential statutory violations. That is the entire issue. That is precisely why every figure in Washington was suddenly overcome with intense anxiety. Consequently, the individual stands before the court addressing inquiries from both the prosecution and the defense counsel. The questioning process is relentless, intended to break their resolve. And it succeeds, though not in the manner anyone anticipated. The individual does not dissolve into a falsehood. They break down into absolute reality. The distress intensifies, the voice falters, and then all restraint shatters. Trump ordered it. This is immediately followed by a physical breakdown, a body dropping to the floor of a federal chamber because the burden of safeguarding that hidden truth was simply too great to endure standing up. That is no performance. That is the literal outcome when you place an individual under such immense intimidation that their own physical systems shut down. And Judge Sullivan, a jurist familiar with the lowest points of human conduct and the highest expressions of legal maneuvering, recognizes that the definitive moment has arrived. He terminates the chaotic display. He calls for a temporary suspension of the trial amid the disorder, and then he focuses his attention directly on the figure on the display screen. Trump is monitoring the event from a distance, concealing himself in truth, and Sullivan ensures the transmission functions clearly in both directions. I perceive you monitoring these events, the judge's presentation implies, and I require you to comprehend the consequences of what this material demonstrates. Next comes the statutory reference, 18 U.S.C. 1512. That represents far more than a numerical code. It is the pathway toward a permanent uniform and institutional life. The reaction? Exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes of absolute radio silence. No tirades concerning biased media corporations. No assertions of executive mistreatment. Merely staff members contacting outlets like Axios and Politico to quietly pass along the descriptor catatonic. And that constitutes the most alarming aspect for the executive mansion personnel. How do you manage a situation when the leadership goes completely mute? You begin collecting your belongings. You begin seeking personal legal representation. You begin evaluating whether you will be classified as an active partner in crime or merely a minor detail in the narrative of the collapse. This quiet period stands as the absolute polar opposite of Trump's established public persona. This is an individual who thrives on conflict and auditory volume. A damaging media cycle functions as energy. A judicial proceeding is utilized as a campaign venue. However, this particular development was a structural termination warning from a member of the federal bench. This was entirely unique. This was the exact type of admonition that forces even the most aggressive litigants to recognize they must remain silent or permanently forfeit their opportunity to ever step onto a country club grounds again. The lack of commentary indicates that the legal defense group has at last won the internal debate regarding Trump's restraint. Do not utter a word, they pleaded. Every single phrase you articulate serves as an advantage handed straight to the state's attorneys. And regarding advantages handed to the state, let us analyze the Bondi alterations once more, as this functions as the analytical tool carving through the defense narrative. Pam Bondi, the chief legal officer, authorized the concealment of particular records. The witness, during their emotional breakdown, asserted to the court that the information hidden beneath those dark lines represents the definitive proof. It constitutes the explicit directive from Trump, the instruction to make the problem vanish. That is the connection. That is the operational linkage binding the Oval Office to the active obstruction of the legal process. Meanwhile, Kash Patel represents the unresolved detail. He offered statements that the physical evidence now directly refutes. If he fabricated stories to shield the leadership, he faces immediate liability for perjury. If he spoke accurately and the documentation demonstrates the leadership mandated the violation, Trump faces permanent confinement. It is an impossible scenario for the defense camp. Judge Sullivan has observed this developing catastrophe for several months. He has watched Leavitt experience a physical breakdown. He has watched the executive team enter into an internal conflict. He has watched the conservative Senate membership display visible discomfort. Then, right inside his own domain, his judicial chamber, an individual is so intensely intimidated that they pass out while shouting accusations. At that point, a magistrate ceases to function merely as an impartial coordinator and transforms into a defender of the legal system itself. He delivered a declaration that resonated across the globe. If these assertions are verified, your career is finished. The quiet that arrived in the aftermath was not merely an absence of sound. It served as a tacit confession. It represented the sound of a legal team in total disarray. It was the sound of personnel coming to terms with the reality that the otherwise untouchable figure might have finally encountered a barrier he cannot bypass. They are not organizing the upcoming campaign stop. They are preparing for a governance transition emergency. They are analyzing the language of the 25th Amendment as though it were a tactical handbook. They are attempting to determine if they can separate their names from the situation before the enterprise sinks entirely, with the leader still immobilized at the controls. This is the precise day chroniclers will highlight. Not the vote cycles, not the structural challenges. This specific date, the day a federal magistrate confronted the chief executive of the United States and declared, "Meddle further, and you will finish your days in confinement." And for the initial time in his privileged existence, the individual possessed absolutely no counterargument. This represents a total institutional collapse occurring live on every single media network. This is the exact variety of instability that unbalances an entire governing structure. This is the definitive moment that scholars will review as a historic pivot point, and the entire sequence initiated with a solitary witness breaking down emotionally and exclaiming that Trump issued explicit directives to compromise the inquiry. What precisely set off this entire judicial disaster? The reality is quite clear when you analyze the components. Based on the documentation that the state's attorneys are highlighting within the chamber, specific funds were transferred, funds directed straight to Mar-a-Lago. Furthermore, these transactions align flawlessly with the text alterations mandated by Pam Bondi. She occupies the role of Attorney General. The nation's chief law enforcement official simply dictated that particular records be blacked out and withheld from the public domain. Now, the individual giving testimony is asserting that those hidden files contain literal validation of Trump directing witness compromise. Kash Patel offered statements under oath regarding a portion of these occurrences, yet prosecutors maintain he fabricated his story. They are calling him out for perjury. They possess documentation that refutes his narrative. They have the financial records. Consequently, Judge Sullivan reviewed this entire collection of information and essentially declared, "Understand this. If it is demonstrated that you managed this operation, if it is shown that you issued explicit directives to your cabinet to interfere with individuals in a federal inquiry, you are being removed from society permanently. You are facing the remainder of your days in confinement, decades upon decades, within a federal penitentiary, separated from the world." That constitutes the statement delivered by the bench, and the chief executive offered no reply. Very well, let us systematically analyze the precise events that transpired inside that chamber today, because the dominant press agencies are still trying to determine the appropriate method to even describe this event. They are approaching it with extreme hesitation and care, correct? They are protecting themselves. Well, hypothetically, the jurist implied, no, cease that line of thought. The jurist implied nothing. The jurist issued an explicit warning of life confinement anchored by material proof that has already been introduced. This is anchored by documented reality. This is anchored by sworn statements. This is anchored by original records. This is not guesswork. Let us trace the precise sequence of today's frantic developments. The morning initiated like any standard morning under this leadership team, which translates to it being completely volatile from the start. You have administration chiefs whispering in corridors regarding the execution of the 25th Amendment.